Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, Assistant Professor of Communication and Media at Lund University. You can follow the show on X at SMNP Podcast or visit us on the web at socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. This episode is going to be all about Wikipedia, which is just one of these platforms that is so important but consistently flies under the radar. And my guest to discuss this is Rhiannon Ruff. She is a Wikipedia expert and a founding partner at Lumino, which is a reputation management agency, helping clients to monitor and manage their digital presence, and Wikipedia is a key part of that. And one of the reasons that Wikipedia is so important is that its data plugs into so many other services. So Wikipedia results often appear at the top of Google search. They're used in smart speakers when people ask questions. ChatGPT is pulling from Wikipedia data. And apart from these technical products, think about how often humans are using Wikipedia. So Wikipedia data is showing up in government reports. Before heads of state meet other foreign dignitaries, they get a briefing that's often based off Wikipedia data. What's on Wikipedia often ends up in books and maybe is not cited correctly. And so that has big ramifications for misinformation, where if there's the wrong information on Wikipedia, it can spill over into other aspects of society. And as we'll talk about, one example is the case of Alan McMasters, the Scottish inventor of the toaster, who was in fact not the inventor of the toaster, but was just a guy put on Wikipedia, leading to, for example, Scottish school children to paint toast and build toasters out of building blocks, when in fact the inventor of the toaster was from Minneapolis. So this example and others come from a book that Rhi has written entitled Wikipedia and Crisis Communications, and I absolutely highly recommend it to get a sense of what's happening on Wikipedia, what are the rules, and actually how can you as an individual influence what is on your Wikipedia page, because you can't do that directly, and there are some negative consequences for trying to do that, as we'll talk about in this episode. So hopefully this brief intro gives you an idea of how important having a accurate, but also hopefully positive Wikipedia page is if you are a candidate or party. And so Rhi has also written a column in the PR Daily on what are the consequences of Wikipedia for political campaigns. So I'll link to that as well. But without further ado, let me turn it over to Rhi Ruff. Again, she is a Wikipedia expert and a founding partner at Lumino. Rhi, thanks for taking the time out, and welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So typically on this show, the type of guests that we have coming from industry are working in comms or strategy for political campaigns. And from what I gather, Lumino's focus is a bit more on brands and nonprofits, but I'm sure there's some synergies between those actors and campaigns when it comes to digital, and especially when it comes to Wikipedia. So could you give us a brief introduction to Lumino and where Wikipedia fits into the agency's overall approach in improving clients' digital presence?
Yeah, of course. So at Lumino, our main focus is really on brands and executives and helping them to develop a solid, sustainable digital reputation. So what that actually means is usually organizations are coming to us with a specific issue or goal in mind. Oftentimes it's super narrow. So they might want to update their Google Knowledge Graph panel or fix some incorrect data that's being connected to them in search or in AI tools. Increasingly, that's an issue. But what we find is that achieving that goal or fixing that issue requires multiple different approaches, one of which is Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is so integrated into the digital landscape. That's really how it flows in, is just, someone comes to us and says, hey, we're seeing this in search, or people are coming to us and they think this, and we really want to address that, and we think it's coming from here. And then we dive in a bit more and we're like, actually, it's coming from here, here, and here online. But Wikipedia is one of those areas that we often find is a big culprit for this. Information gets outdated, or they don't have the details that are connecting up right, or there's someone with the same name and that's causing an issue. So all those reasons bring us back to Wikipedia.
Yeah, and I think one of the fascinating things about Wikipedia is that it's such a central hub in today's information environment, and we all know that, right? We all know that Wikipedia results come up, almost first in Google search, but we still don't really think about how important managing Wikipedia is. So, could you explain this link between Wikipedia and Google search, and also where Wikipedia data might show up in places where we're using media every day?
The key to this actually lies in search engine algorithms and what they're trying to do. So the goal of these algorithms is always to try and bring the searcher the most relevant content and to a certain extent, the most reliable content. So they're not trying to bring you something from a site that no one else is ever going to or that isn't linked to other sites. And the way that Wikipedia is set up, it is truly just catnip for search engines. It does everything that the search engine algorithm is looking for. It has a ton of information, it has so many articles, and there's oftentimes an article for the exact search term that someone's looking for. So instantly, like the search engine is like, yes, this, here we go. And then it has super deep interlinked content on its site. So not just snippets of information, but these really detailed pages with a lot of additional terms that are linked to or related to that potential search term. And then, of course, Wikipedia links to lots of other sites and is linked back to from a lot of sites. So the way that search engines are reading it is they're seeing this is a really trusted site because look how much it is linked into all these different places and links out to all these places. And look at how much information it has. So this must be something that you'll want. And then it's pushing it up in search. So that's kind of the Google search aspect is just like, the algorithm looks at it and it's like, you are beautiful to me. I want to show you that you in my search results. And then, as you mentioned, like this Wikipedia data is showing up elsewhere as well. I already mentioned the Google Knowledge Graph panel. So, that little short description of an organization or an individual is usually pulled from Wikipedia. That's just one way that that information turns up. And some of it happens via like the algorithms and tools like that snippet. And some of it's much more human process. So you'll find that someone uses Wikipedia to get an overview of a topic, and then they're going to use that information to write up like a one pager, or maybe they create a summary on another website, or they add it to a news report, and then that information just ends up circulating that way. I just heard this week about Wikipedia being used to create executive dossiers when they travel and visit with foreign dignitaries. So those people know like a background about them when they're meeting them, which is fascinating to me. It makes total sense, but obviously that can cause problems. And of course, the huge new one is AI. You've got like these LLMs, and they are just like looking for where there's great information out there and good deep data that they can pull from. And we know that Wikipedia was part of that learning data set for ChatGPT. And then for any of these AI tools that are pulling from live data online, it's super likely that Wikipedia is one of those sources, just for similar reasons that it ranks high in search.
Yeah, and in the book you give an example, a quite humorous example of the guy who invented the toaster.
Yes.
I forget his exact name, but could you sort of relay that example because I think it's a good illustration of how when you're searching for who invented the toaster to ChatGPT, you might get an answer that is not particularly correct.
I'm just going to do a search right now to see who it says invented the toaster. That they're fixing it online all the time, but you do still get a result from the BBC with the fake name, but it's explaining the fake. So Alan McMasters is the name that was included on Wikipedia as being the inventor of the toaster. Not actually the inventor of the toaster at all. It's just someone that the editor knew and they put their name in. And it started to end up in other places because people were going to Wikipedia, finding this, and then they were putting it into books, into online summaries about the history of the toaster. And so it just started to become part of online lore, if you will. And then the hoax was unveiled. Someone figured it out that this was not, in fact, the correct information. A history buff out there was like, yeah, no, that's not right at all. And it got corrected. But still, you're going to find in like odd corners of the internet, Alan McMasters is known as being the inventor of the toaster. His legend remains.
It reminds me of this. Have you ever seen this very obscure movie, probably, but where schoolboy gets struck by lightning at the same time he's like fiddling with the internet and he gets the internet downloaded into his brain and goes on the quiz team and gets every answer right except there was a bug on the internet, and that's turns out being the exposed as to how he absorbed the internet into his brain. I'll find that that movie and I'll put it the name of it. I'll put at the end of the episode for listeners to stick around. But I'm curious because we've had a lot of political campaigners on this show, and they often talk about the importance of Google search because that's the one time that people are really looking for information about you as a candidate or perhaps your opponent. And in the column that you wrote that'll be down in the episode description, you mention some updating of Wikipedia pages going back as far as 2008 with McCain and Palin. But why do you think it is that Wikipedia kind of flies under the radar relative to social media communication or having Google ads? It's odd, I think, because Wikipedia is still the backbone of a lot of that information. So why do you think it gets so overlooked in the realm of politics, at least in terms of how they talk about their communication strategy?
I think it's broader than just in politics. There's this really strange dichotomy with Wikipedia. It has all this impact and power, and people want to be able to affect its content, but they also don't take it that seriously. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently. I think some of it may go back to Wikipedia kind of being derided as not that reliable. You have educators say, don't look at Wikipedia, don't use Wikipedia as a source, it's not good. And then there's a lot of misunderstanding as well about how Wikipedia works. So, you have folks who just think that you can just hide your involvement if you have a conflict of interest, or you need to get someone else to do it, or that you shouldn't touch Wikipedia. So there's this sort of soup of different issues going on of like not taking Wikipedia super seriously, maybe feeling like you have to kind of have like a sneaky strategy for it rather than embracing it and making it part of your full strategy. I've also really found that unlike things like social media platforms, there's not usually one person or one team that's taking responsibility for monitoring Wikipedia, for learning how the site works, for updating it. There are oftentimes different, really random people who end up with Wikipedia on their plate. We have, social media managers now, social media teams. We have communications folks who have a certain remit. You have PR folks who have a certain remit. But Wikipedia just kind of slips through the cracks, and anyone from executive assistants to the IT team ends up with this on their plate. It's like, can you just update? So I don't know that I have a clear answer here on this one. It is very baffling to me that it is both known for having this major impact and being really influential, but at the same time, no one is really kind of taking the time to take it super seriously and approach it in a very kind of strategic and thoughtful way.
Right. But it's still there, right?
Yeah.
People are still Googling. They're increasingly using ChatGPT. So as a campaign or a politician or a brand, of course, you want to make sure that when people are searching for information about you, they get good and hopefully positive information. But you can't just go in and edit your Wikipedia page. Why not?
Okay. So let's put ethics aside for a moment. Let's assume that, we don't have to worry about whether this is a good or a bad thing to do. And we're just talking about practicalities. So the short answer to this is it's against Wikipedia's rules. You're likely going to get caught and it's going to look really bad for you. So let me kind of break this down a little bit. Thinking first of all about the rule side of things, Wikipedia is trying to be an independent, non-biased form of information. It wants to be an encyclopedia. So these two aspects, independent, non-biased, super important to them. And the way that the site's editors, they're all just volunteers. They're just people from every walk of life who like to update the site, be part of this Wikipedia community. The way that they're approaching this is twofold. First, from a content perspective, everything that's on a Wikipedia page has to reflect the balance of available reputable sources. So whatever you're adding, you can't give too much weight to just the negatives or just the positives, unless That's how it's generally been portrayed in the media. So if you have a candidate and all they've received is glowing, amazing, positive press, then their Wikipedia page is going to reflect that. If, on the other hand, they've just been under like an absolute deluge of criticism and complaints, then their page is going to skew more negative. Generally speaking, it falls somewhere in the middle. And then from an editor behavior standpoint, there are rules around how editors should contribute to the site to try and enforce this like non-biased independent approach. So the first thing is Wikipedia's editors want to know if you have a conflict of interest, if you're trying to contribute to any topic. They have certain terms of use on the site that require that you disclose if you have a financial connection to any topic you want to edit about. So if you're working for a campaign, that would apply to your candidate. But it also applies to their opponent too, because you have a financial connection there as well. Like you're financially incentivized to want to add bad stuff to their page. So you're required to disclose, I work for X. And you shouldn't really edit the pages directly either. The site has a whole bunch of guidelines around this, but basically it comes down to you should make a request using the site's discussion pages. Ask editors who don't have any kind of conflict of interest to review and make those updates. So if you don't do those two things, if you don't disclose, and if you don't use discussion pages and make requests, you can just be blocked from the site. More typically, what happens is that your edit's going to get reverted, perhaps sanction you, block you from editing certain topics and things like that. And of course, people do try and do this. People do try and just go in and edit and add negative or positive things. But it's something that editors are looking for, and especially for political candidates, they're really looking for this. There's a super great analysis from the Stanford Internet Observatory from 2021. They reviewed editing around the 2020 elections in British Columbia, and they identified partisan edits from both sides. So they saw that there were editors who had a bias and who were editing from both sides, who were trying to insert positive information on their candidates' pages and negative details on the opponent's pages. But they ultimately found that Wikipedia's process didn't let these editors deliberately distort these pages. Ultimately, they weren't successful in causing any kind of long-lasting bias on any of these pages. The editing process and the guidelines were able to prevent that. So these edits were reverted or corrected, and editors were blocked from editing pages where they'd shown this strong bias. So I think that's a really good example of this is why you can't do it, is essentially it's not really going to work.
Right. And it points to just, the power of moderation that we see working still on a large scale on Reddit. But I think on Wikipedia, it's even more because the rules aren't made up by the editors themselves necessarily. It's much more strict and standardized in terms of what is a conflict of interest.
Exactly.
So let's say you try to do it anyways, because it's not too difficult just to set up an account and try to make an edit. You make an interesting point in your book about Wikipedia's tone, which is very neutral and encyclopedic. And it can be a challenge for marketers and public relations experts who kind of typically write more promotional content to hit this type of tone. So could you break that down for us, the importance of tone for a Wikipedia page and how it might be a challenge for people trained in PR?
Oh my goodness, this is honestly so hard for most PR folks. And there's really a lot of reasons behind it. So the tone issue from Wikipedia's perspective, it really goes back to what I was saying before about Wikipedia's trying to be encyclopedic. They don't want to be entertaining or persuading. They're not really trying to have the most flashy content or share details that are going to push you in one direction or another. The site's editors are aiming to write really straightforward, factual copy that presents a summary of the sources. And this is what trips people up a lot. It's a lot more like writing like a high school level paper than it is trying to do anything else, trying to present any other type of copy. You're writing from the sources and then summarizing in your own words. Like you're not coming up with your own thesis here. You're not coming up with your own messaging and then trying to like back it up. You really should be using those sources and summarizing it and putting it into like this very straightforward tone. You can't insert any jargon. or use vague phrases or words that imply something without showing it. So you can't have like won many awards, created hundreds of jobs. They really want to see specifics and have more of like a show rather than tell approach to things.
Right. So it's not like the kind of CV bullet points you'd see on LinkedIn, which is what that just reminded me of.
Yeah, exactly. And they have all these manuals of style pages on Wikipedia that delve into exactly what types of wording are good and bad and how you should approach different things. But I think the main blocker for most folks who are diving in and who haven't touched Wikipedia before and who are coming from more PR and comms background is you're not starting from the idea of what message do we want to convey or promote. That's the big hurdle. Like you've got to dismantle that and start from a whole different perspective in terms of like, okay, what's already being said and how do I summarize that?
You could definitely outsource that gig to a lot of doctoral students and master's students, I think, because it's perfect for the type of dry stuff that we typically write. But let's say you go in and you make some edits and they get reverted. I mean, on the one hand, not a big deal, right? The page just goes back to how it was before. But there's also additional things that editors can do to punish your edits with more of a potentially lasting impact on your page, but also potentially your brand. So could you explain what these flags are and how different types of sanctions might, yeah, exactly, affect this Wikipedia page? And do those types of sanctions spill over into Google's knowledge panel and SEO as well?
So the actual purpose of the flags, it really should be for a Wikipedia editor to let another editor know, hey, there's a problem on this page, it needs to be fixed. I can't get to this right now. Can someone do this? Like that's really the original purpose of all these flags was identify issues that you can't immediately deal with and you're hoping that other editors will come by and help out with. But they also let readers know you might want to look carefully at this. You know, maybe the sourcing is problematic. Things seem biased on the page. Maybe there's multiple issues on the page that need to be addressed. So the flags convey this general sense that the page isn't reliable. You might not want to trust everything on it. So over time, we found that some editors are using the flags in kind of a punitive way. They'll come along and be like, oh my goodness, this page is so promotional. Slap a flag on it. And they may never intend upon coming back and trying to fix that page. They just want to say, this is a mess. This is a terrible page. You've done bad. And there's also some flags that are oftentimes purely used for more of that punitive approach. There's one that gets used if editors have identified that someone has edited a page and hasn't disclosed their financial conflict of interest. And the flag that gets added in that case, sometimes it's just left there forever as a scarlet letter. You know, this page has been edited by someone with an undisclosed conflict of interest. And there's nothing that can be fixed with that flag. It's just letting readers know, hey, people with a COI have been involved here. They've edited this page. You might want to be cautious about this. And that might remain there forever. Even if the actual issues in the page are resolved, even if the edits get removed that caused the issue in the first place, it can just stay there. And it just makes people feel like they don't trust what's included. So even if you have really great information about your brand there, people might not necessarily think, okay, this is a good, trustworthy source of information for me to look at for this information. They might also feel like it reflects poorly on you as a brand, that you would get involved and you would do this and you would break the site's rules. So that's the sort of punitive aspect of those flags. There's not really any spillover to Google. It's much more of an impact on like human readers versus AI or the Google algorithm. It's more just to give people pause when they're reading the page, so they might not have as much trust in the information or the brand.
Gotcha. Because there's still all of these links coming in and out of Wikipedia. It still has this favorable setup for search engines that you were talking about before.
Yeah, the flags don't cause any impact. They're not going to like push it down in search. They're not going to like throw up a flag or add any kind of commentary when folks are finding that information elsewhere.
Gotcha. But, still Wikipedia is this large kind of moving organism. You can't keep track of every page. So it is possible that you could make some edits. I'm just thinking in a political context. Let's say you have a nice page set up for your candidate. No one knows who they are yet. So and maybe they wouldn't get on Wikipedia because of notability, but let's just say they do.
Yeah.
You get away with your edits. You argue that this can actually backfire in the long term and potentially at the worst possible time. So, can you describe that dynamic of being successful in the short term, but maybe hurting yourself in the longer term if you have a conflict of interest and you're editing your own page?
Yeah, so there are millions of Wikipedia articles at this point and billions of edits happening every year. So it's entirely possible that some sneaky edits can get past Wikipedia editors who might otherwise notice them and realize they don't follow the guidelines that you haven't disclosed and revert them. There's just too much happening on Wikipedia and too few super active, very knowledgeable Wikipedia editors to be able to pick up on everything that happens. But Wikipedia keeps an archive of every change that's been made on any page. So it's always there. There's a long memory on the site, and editors can always go back and see what has happened on a page before. I've seen pages that have been suddenly, like out of nowhere, it seems, drastically edited down and flagged because an editor has realized that there were some undisclosed conflict of interest edits from like 5+ years ago. So it's a matter of time and attention. And with political candidates, you're dealing with really specific patterns of attention, right? So you're going to have a lot of people looking at the page at certain times. And I've done a bit of digging around this and taken a look and definitely see that right before debates, right before election days, there is a big spike in viewership for political candidates' articles. And it's not just, regular readers who are going to be paying more attention to those pages at the time. It's also all of those knowledgeable Wikipedia editors. They're going to suddenly be looking at those pages because they have it in mind too. Hey, there's a lot of attention here. People are potentially going to be dropping by and making random edits to these pages. And maybe they just want to also give them a quick look over for these potential problems. So right at the point where you have lots of people about to come to your page or maybe already coming and looking at that page, you're also going to have Wikipedia editors looking at those pages. And they could notice those sneaky edits that have taken place and boom, suddenly you're blocked. The edits are reverted. You might have some flags on the page. If you're especially unlucky and if you try to pull something really not cool, you might also get some media attention for it too. So just a perfect storm of things arising just because of that cycle of attention.
Right. And in your book, you argue about this more from the perspective of crisis communication, and that, if you have this sort of, let's say, bad PR or you have a crisis going on, attention drives to your page. Editors go to your page as well. They see the edits and they do the same thing, right? They slap this flag on or they block you out. And that's really interesting because it's like you got away with it, but right at the time that you're getting your highest traffic is when all of a sudden you're getting everything reverted. But what I wanted to ask you about is that you kind of argue that in a crisis, as an organization, you want to decide if that's the time you want to actually start kind of being active and updating in the crisis. And I wonder if you can explain that decision to go in and try to edit versus waiting the crisis out. And do you think that applies to political campaigns as well around these times of debates? Like, should political campaigns be trying to get ahead of the framing and the coverage of their page at moments of high attention, or should they kind of wait and see how things play out?
Oh my goodness. This is such a good question because it really, in an ideal universe, and the same with crisis as with political campaigns, you'd ideally have gotten ahead of this, had your disclosed account set up way ahead of time, already have introduced yourself on Wikipedia, have suggested some good faith edits, some like really straightforward stuff. Maybe you've added some nice new references, provided editors with some information that they could add to the page that's nice and uncontroversial in advance, so that when you get the attention on the page, all you're really having to do is go in and help respond, as it were, point out if there's pieces of coverage that are being missed or if something has been misinterpreted, all those types of things. But if you're not in that ideal scenario, then why not start then? And I think like the why nots would be, if you're going to only go in and push things that are going to be controversial, that are going to be disagreeable to editors, then you probably shouldn't. You should probably wait and see how things play out. But if you are going to be open to the fact that, okay, Wikipedia does have to include, the balance of sourcing, they're going to have to include things from different places. Right now, you've got a lot of attention on the page. You've got editors who are already there. They're already involved. They're willing. They're interested in this topic. They're reading up about it. Why not take that moment to identify issues that need to be fixed? Look at details that have been added and tell them, hey, I think you missed that this source actually says this. Share different sources that haven't already been included, and use that wave to be able to make sure that what has been included is accurate, that it's not accidentally including some mistakes that then you have to go back and try and deal with in the future. That's the way that I think about it. I think you just have to weigh really carefully what sorts of updates and changes you're wanting to put in. And is that what editors are going to be aligned with too? And if you're trying to put things in that are just like, oh, they didn't list all of their awards, and they are more interested in making sure that they have an accurate coverage of, a controversy that's occurring, that's going to be at odds, and that's not really going to be a good fit. Looking for ways that you can mesh and align with the activity that's already happening is really the key to it.
Right. And that's what I learned so much from reading your book, is that you have to know a little bit about the kind of norms and practices and the way that the Wikipedia editors kind of operate, and that there is actually a way to not necessarily directly influence the content of your page, but to get editors' attention and get their awareness that they may want to update your page. Because I would just think the idea is just step back and just like wait and pray to the Wikipedia gods that they edit the page, or maybe, as you suggest also in the book, like you can get positive media coverage, like focus on your PR strategy, and that may spill over into Wikipedia. But there is actually steps that you can take to manage your Wikipedia page, at least in a little bit of a direction, try to shape how it looks. So what are those steps? You alluded to a couple of them, but how can we appease these Wikipedia gods, i.e. the editors?
Well, I think one thing you mentioned there in terms of like working on your PR, that is one of the very first steps I would say before you even get to like going onto Wikipedia, is look at that media coverage and think about the gaps that you're aware of, or the issues that that there are on the Wikipedia page and what's in the media. Do you already have media that clarifies some of these things? Or are these things that you can feed back into your media engagement to ensure that, okay, I've talked about this time in my past, or this issue that came up, this information about this particular scheme that I was involved in is now out there in the media where it wasn't before. So doing all of that, I think first can be a really great step. Just figuring out what sources you have, what you don't, where you can improve them. And then the next thing is come to Wikipedia and think of it as you not just kind of coming in to influence, but participate in the discussions, to be part of how you can update, rather than thinking about, I'm going to come in and update. We talk about managing Wikipedia, but it's more sort of like managing your own approach to Wikipedia in a way. And practically speaking, setting up a Wikipedia user account is the first step. So having one person be the point person, have them set up a Wikipedia account that's just going to be them, and name it appropriately. We can't have any team names or campaign names. It just has to like identify as one person, and disclose your connection. Now, be really clear on your user page, give like a full explanation of how you're connected to the campaign or the candidate, whatever it might be that the relationship is. And then the next step from there is introduce yourself via Wikipedia's discussion pages. So every single Wikipedia page about a topic has its own talk page, which is kind of like a discussion board where you can bring issues up to Wikipedia editors, you can discuss with them, you can participate in existing discussions. it has to be focused on what's going on the Wikipedia page. You can't just be asking like general questions about the topic. It has to be like, how are we explaining this on the page? That's how the talk page functions. You want to introduce yourself there and present things that you have to offer. So whether that's like, hey, I noticed that you're looking for sources for X or Y. Here's two really great sources to help editors out. Or maybe you go in with a really straightforward first request. I see that editors are currently discussing this topic. While you're here, if you wouldn't mind fixing, maybe it's their date of birth or, where they went to school, something like that. That's just like an easy, straightforward fix. Always be disclosing, though, throughout all of this. The more transparent you can be, the more editors will feel like you're trying to follow the rules. So that's the most important thing.
And is there a type of, just lack of knowledge on my side, is there a type of kind of like karma score like Reddit has, or type of credibility that you like building that account up over time and building trust with the editors? Or is it more of just like a one-to-one type of interaction with the page?
It's like an invisible karma system. Like I was mentioning before, everything on Wikipedia is archived, and that actually includes, you can go and look at any individual user's user contributions. So you can see all of the edits they've made, all the talk page posts that they've made, and you can go back and look at that. So you just have to imagine that any editor who's coming across your account and is seeing these requests you're making, they're going to be able to go back and take a look at all of the past discussions and requests that you've had to see what type of editor you've been. Have you been straightforward and transparent the whole time about your conflict of interest? Have you been making reasonable requests and doing that in a very civil manner and understanding when editors push back? They're going to be looking for those types of things. So while there isn't like an actual score that you can track, there are ways that editors are looking at your behavior and deciding whether or not they want to, kind of interact with you, whether they want to help with your requests, and whether they are going to come in. It's really kind of influencing them, whether they think that your requests are going to be reasonable or not.
Right. And I want to get more to that interaction with editors in a second. But one thing that I think is really interesting for the listeners to know, and something you also discuss in the book, is this idea of the watch list. So each editor has a watch list that they kind of have this series of pages that they monitor. And so what happens is that if you go this sort of more ethical and approved route, stating your conflict of interest, saying, hey, here are the edits that I would like to propose that you make. If you get the attention of an editor, then you sort of get a watchdog for your page in terms of people who might be trying to edit it, let's say your opponents. So could you explain that that added benefit of having an editor kind of enlisted to watching your page as a kind of value or extra incentive to go this ethical route?
Yeah. Well, I think it kind of ties into that karma effect as well. Because if you're involved on Wikipedia, if you have been a proactive and constructive member of the Wikipedia community, even with your conflict of interest, if you've been providing sources and being super helpful and only making requests that seem reasonable, editors are going to be more likely to view your page that you're interested in a positive manner. And in terms of like, do they want to be involved in it? Do they want to watch it and keep an eye on edits? Part of it may be that they then add it to their watch list. They might be looking over it, especially if they've responded to past requests of yours. And if you have several editors even who've done this, then the more editors who are watching your page, the better, because they'll be able to notice anything that goes awry. Mentioned before, like, there's effects of like time and attention in terms of discovering when something problematic has happened on a page. So it's really, you're encouraging positive attention on your page by making these requests, by getting editors over there, potentially having them add this to their watch list. They are going to be looking out for those issues to pop up, or they're just going to be more likely to spot them just by virtue of it being on their watch list.
Mm. And, we were talking about earlier how it's maybe a challenge for PR specialists to write in this neutral tone, but I would imagine this is where the kind of PR and branding can kind of work in terms of getting the attention of these editors and, in a sense, getting the edits that you want in, even though you lose control over doing it directly. And so that's what I wanted to ask you about, because from what I gather, these talk pages are pretty aggressive. Like, editors can be quite mean. I think they tend to skew male and highly educated. So how do you, as a specialist in kind of doing this type of work, how do you approach that sort of more soft skill in dealing with these editors who, also from what I gather reading your book, like, they're pretty busy because Wikipedia is a volunteer job. They take it seriously and they have their own lives as well. So how do you approach actually conversing with these Wikipedia gods?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of this is where it is good to have that branding and PR background, know how to pull the levers to incentivize someone, to make someone feel more warmly towards you. And that sounds kind of a malicious process almost, but it's really not. It's more like recognizing these folks do have a lot of pulls on their time. They have a lot of things that are going on. They want to edit about topics that they're interested in. So the main things that you want to think about are, how can I make this an appealing request for them? How can I make this really straightforward for them to understand what it is I want? How can I make it as easy as possible to say yes to this request? So giving them all the information they need, making sure it's super clear why you want this, why this particular update is necessary and is supported by sources, and then giving them the actual sources and copy and everything in Wikipedia formatting so it's easy for them to do. The more that you put on their plate in terms of having to really delve in and figure out what it is that you want, why you want this, what sources are out there, how to actually write this up, the trickier it becomes, the less likely they are to want to engage with it. And the more that they are going to be very blunt and move along. I think you also have to be aware that you can't take it personally. If someone's just like, I don't want to respond to this request, or I think that this is too promotional, like, you can't take that personally. You just have to take a step back and look at it again and think about what it is that you're proposing and how you can adjust it to meet what they're looking for. So being open to compromise is really big on Wikipedia. And that's how the community works in general. There's a lot of butting of heads, but ultimately editors are looking for ways that they can make the site better. So wherever you can help to show that's what you're looking for too, and make those compromises to get to that place where everyone is happy, that's going to work in your favor.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And as you mentioned with that Stanford Internet Observatory study, it kind of self-moderates over time.
Yes, exactly.
But my last question for you has to do with kind of, we've been digging into the ins and outs of editing at the kind of micro level, but zooming out at the macro level, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because you have a lot of experience in this area, and I'm sure also with PR and branding and kind of mainstream news. And it's something that you allude to in your book and something I was thinking about when reading it, which is you have this kind of mutually reinforcing relationship between the press and Wikipedia, because Wikipedia has this notability criteria where, to make edits and to justify them, kind of the top level is that they come from established, reputable news sources. But then those journalists for those sources are sourcing their information from Wikipedia. So it's kind of, we would say in academia, it's sort of endogenous, because you have a conflation between these two entities are not entirely distinct. And so I'm just wondering how you see that from a kind of societal level in terms of framing, where the information from the page might influence a news story, which then influences the page. Is there anything that brands or politicians can do to kind of get into that spiral? And what do you think that spiral may mean for how we think about a certain brand or organization?
Oh, I think that this is a really tough thing that the media in general is dealing with, and Wikipedia is definitely figuring out for itself. They're looking at it from the perspective, how do we avoid this spiral? How do we make sure that we don't end up just kind of, Wikipedia says something, therefore the media says something, therefore Wikipedia says something. It's actually something that there are guidelines and essays on Wikipedia about how to identify when that is potentially happening, when a source has become a mirror for Wikipedia, and finding alternatives that might actually provide a more accurate view on things. likewise, I think it's something that brands are concerned about because they are evolving and changing all the time. Companies pivot, they release new services, they release new products. They don't always want to be known for the exact same things. So they really are sometimes caught in this spiral themselves where Wikipedia has described them as a particular thing. And therefore, that's what journalists tend to describe them as. But that's not really what they do anymore. But because journalists describe them as that, that's how Wikipedia is describing them, because Wikipedia looks at how the range of sources describe that topic. So I think brands don't necessarily want to lean into the spiral always. They want to try and pull back from it. And I honestly do not have an answer here because I think it's definitely more of that PR and media aspect of how do you build really good relationships with the media? How do you ensure that you are getting good media coverage these days, which I understand from talking to colleagues who are in that zone, the media has really changed. It's so much harder these days to pitch a story and to get types of coverage that would have been totally normal like 5, 10 years ago. It's a lot more challenging in that respect. So I think that's really where I feel like academics can do so much to help by continuing to raise awareness of these issues that happen between kind of the links between journalism and the digital space, and increasingly perhaps with AI as well. Because now we have outlets who are relying on AI to write articles, and no doubt they are pulling from sources like Wikipedia. So how do we navigate that and ensure that we don't just end up with the same information and being trapped in an information spiral?
Well, your appeal goes to the right ears on this podcast, and I'm sure that the academics listening have appreciated your insights into Wikipedia, which again is just this overlooked but so important element of knowledge and society worldwide. So, Rhi, thanks so much for taking the time out and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I hope it's super helpful to your listeners.
I've just been speaking with Ruff, Wikipedia expert and founding partner at Lumino. Check the episode description for a link to her book, Wikipedia and Crisis Communications. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. The movie I referenced earlier was The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, and in particular, the 1995 Disney remake, which has a 5 out of 10 on IMDb, and I can definitely not recommend. But what I can recommend is keeping an eye on those feeds. Next time, we'll be talking about far-right influencers on social media. So, until then, I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Malmo. See you next time.